Turns out there aren't many military options anymore. There aren't any good ones, at least, for this ongoing war that they have been losing. And so today, instead of any new military options unveiled or tried out when it comes to the Iran war, today we got them proclaiming an economic D-Day against Iran. Given what the real D-Day actually was, you might be forgiven for telling these guys to get the name D-Day out of their mouth altogether. But with viable military options essentially unavailable thanks to the geniuses they've installed at the Pentagon, instead, they're announcing vaguely this economic D-Day as some kind of vague announcement of new economic initiatives targeting Iran. But the real D-Day was all about us supporting our allies to defeat a common enemy. This administration has no real allies anymore. So they may want to call it D-Day, but there's no one to ask to help us storm these proverbial beaches, even though they want to call this D-Day. Without anyone essentially on our side, Trump and his Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, are insisting that they're going to pull off some big new economic thing against Iran. And how are they going to do it? We don't know. But they say they'll punish any nations who help Iran. We don't have any allies to bring into this fight anymore, but we'll punish anybody who helps the other side. This doesn't make much sense to anybody either, because, look at the basics of what we know about who is helping Iran. This is the headline last week at NBC News. Russia is shipping explosives to Iran to bolster its missile and drone arsenal in U.S. war. Okay, we're going to go after countries that are helping Iran. Does that mean we're going after Russia? Are we going to try to rally other countries to go after Russia, crack down on Russia for the way they're helping Iran? Of course not. Of course not. Of course we'd never go after Russia because Trump is beholden somehow or in the spell somehow of Russia's dictator. And so, of course, even as Russia helps Iran, not just financially, not just in terms of oil exports and things like that, but literally shipping them explosives and weapons to use against us. Are we going to do anything about that? No, of course not. Well, how about the sanctions, though? How about countries that have been helping Iran evade U.S. sanctions? Will we go after them? Will we be able to persuade other countries to help us go after anybody who helps Iran evade sanctions? Again, this doesn't make sense to anybody else in the world. Evasion of U.S. sanctions on Iran is a crime under U.S. law. The single largest case ever brought against anyone for helping Iran evade sanctions was brought in federal court in New York against a big bank, a bank from Turkey. Huge case. Biggest sanctions case ever. The biggest case ever about an entity helping Iran evade sanctions. And what happened to that case? Donald Trump insisted that that case be dropped. As a favor to another dictator he likes. As a favor to the authoritarian leader of Turkey. So we need to crack down on people that are helping Iran how are we leading by example there? They're calling for a D-Day against Iran, us leading the world against Iran, right? Except A, we have nobody to lead because under Trump we have no allies anymore. B, we're the ones actually supporting one of the countries giving Iran its weapons because Trump likes the dictator of that country. And C, we're the ones letting Iran get around these supposed sanctions. In that Turkish bank case, the biggest Iran sanctions case ever, it's apparently because Trump likes that dictator too, the guy who's letting that happen. So it's not weird that nobody's jumping up to help. Now that Trump has neutered us in all of these ways, now that this is his big unveiling of the big new fight against Iran as he's losing this war, what has he decided to do to sort of distract us from the catastrophe in this Iran war of choice? Now he's decided that he'll pick another fight. One that maybe he feels like he'll have a better chance of winning. See if he can get something else going with another, vaunted enemy of the United States. In this case, Canada. Started a trade war with Canada. But unlike other countries that have tried to appease Trump when he has picked inane performative trade fights with them, countries like the UK or the EU, right? Canada's Prime Minister, Mark Carney, is not going along with it. He clearly will not be bullied, and the Canadian people have never been more unified behind him because of it. As Stephen March put it at the New York Times on the op-ed page today, quote, "For Canada, the choice came down to either accepting severe but temporary economic instability or binding itself to a pseudo-democratic fiscal basket case of a nation," that's us, "whose only apparent foreign policy objective has become domination for the gratification of the president's slapdash vanity." But Mr. Carney did not simply reject a trade offer on Friday. He was openly defiant of the new breed of American aggression. Mr. Trump's world, a world of transaction and submission, is not the only world we all have to live in. Mr. Carney did what Canadians elected him to do, stand up for Canada. It's funny to wake up relieved that you're about to take a beating, but we will not go along to get along. The American president clearly did not know whom he was dealing with. He's following in the grand tradition of American leaders, starting wars with people they don't understand, then wondering what went wrong. This is the country that ought to be, and that almost always has been, our best friend in the world. And I would say we've torpedoed our relationship with our closest ally, our closest friend, and one of our two closest trading partners in the whole world. But, if an actual torpedo were involved here, that would have to involve Pete Hegseth. And so I'm not sure we would worry that much about it because clearly it wouldn't work. The lesson that Prime Minister Mark Carney in Canada clearly learned before this fight, the stance for which his own people, left, right, and center, are now cheering him on, it's not just a performative thing. It's not just a political style thing. What he's doing is what has been shown since time immemorial to work. When it comes to an incompetent bully, giving in and letting them dominate you does not get you treated better in the long run. It just invites further displays of dominance from the bully and further humiliation for you. On the other hand, standing up to the bully and refusing his demands makes you an annoyance to the bully, makes you a harder target. And the last thing an incompetent bully wants to do is anything that smells like hard work. Also, bonus, if you do stand up to the bully, you get to look yourself in the eye, and your kids and your constituents will still love you no matter how it turns out. Donald Trump has a negative approval rating right now in 47 out of 50 U.S. states. There are only 3 states in the whole country in which he is more popular than unpopular right now. Those 3 are West Virginia, Idaho, and most of all, Wyoming. But even in Wyoming, the state where he is more popular than any other state in the country, Trump-style politics are losing hand over fist right now. This didn't get a lot of attention nationwide last week, and I know there's a lot of other news, but this struck me as important. In Wyoming last week, the ultra-conservative MAGA Freedom Caucus thought that in last week's elections, last week's Republican primaries in Wyoming, they would extend the hold they already have on the Wyoming State House, and they thought they would actually take over the Wyoming State Senate as well. This is the MAGA Freedom Caucus in Wyoming, and Wyoming is the most pro-Trump state in the whole country. But instead, look at what happened last week. Last week in Wyoming, the Freedom Caucus not only didn't take over the state Senate, which they thought they would do, they also lost control of the state House. The MAGA Freedom Caucus had 36 seats in the Wyoming House. Last week, 13 of their incumbents were voted out in the primaries. Cowboy State Daily called it a, quote, near complete massacre of Freedom Caucus members and their allies. In that same primary, Trump had an endorsed candidate for governor who also lost. Just like his endorsed candidate for governor lost in Minnesota. That was Mike Lindell. Just like his endorsed candidate for governor in Iowa lost as well. That was Randy Feenstra. Just like his endorsed candidate for governor in Georgia lost as well. That was Burt Jones. Plus, the first candidate he endorsed for governor in South Carolina, she lost too, Pamela Yvette. Incompetence has consequences, and people choosing to fight has consequences too.